Yeah, thank you very much. And greetings from Leiden. And I hope you all have a very good afternoon in Aceh. I'm sorry not to be there with you today and just speaking online at this occasion. I hope you can see my presentation. I can't see my presentation actually, so if somebody can give me the presentation, otherwise I will simply start talking for 20 minutes about Snouck Hurgronje. As you already saw on the podium, when Pak Mark offered a book to the rector, I wrote a biography of Snouck Hurgronje, which is I think 600 pages. So to summarize that in 20 minutes is quite something. And if people can mute their in the Zoom, if everyone can mute their microphone, I won't be disturbed by any sounds. Thank you very much. So let's start with the life and times of Snouck Hurgronje. And I think the first thing I would like to discuss with you is youth and his development as a young man and as a student at Leiden University. Snouck Hurgronje was born in 1857 in a small village called Oosterhout in the province of Brabant in the south of the Netherlands. And he had special parents because his father used to be a preacher in the Protestant Church of the Netherlands until when he was already married, he ran away with the daughter of his colleague in a small village in the Netherlands. So he had his own wife with 5 children, but then he fell in love with the daughter of his colleague, and they run away. And they got 4 children. One of them was Christian Snouck Hurgronje. His father, of course, was fired as a preacher, so he had no job anymore. But fortunately for him, his parents were very rich, so Snouck Hurgronje and his parents could very well live in Oosterhout and enjoy their life. So they were without any financial problems. His father died when Snouck was still young, and then he lived his youth with his mother and his 3 sisters. So he was surrounded by women during his youth. Well, he went to secondary school, and then he went to Leiden University as a young man. And his mother and their family also moved to Leiden and lived there. So his mother, everything was in a way made for a successful study career of Snouck Hurgronje. So he stayed with his mother also during his time of studying. What is special about his study time is that he was a brilliant student. He started religious studies, and he studied first with Professor Kunen, the professor of Old Testament, and he learned as a student to study the Holy Script in a critical way. So Kunen was really a scholar of the Old Testament, who tried to find out who are the authors of the Old Testament, when was the Old Testament written, through a very critical theological approach. So Snouck was trained very much in that sense. After 3 years in his study, he switched from religious studies to the languages of the Middle East, and he got another Professor De Goeie, professor of Arabic studies, who actually worked pretty much in the same fashion as Professor Kunen. So also a critical study of early Arabic manuscripts. This was the way how Snouck was trained, and also his PhD on the Meccan feast. So all the what was celebrated in Mecca around the times of Muhammad. He used all kinds of manuscripts to recreate the history of all the ceremonies in Mecca, and in a very critical way. So this was his training as a student, but somehow he was not satisfied with that in the end. He wanted to learn of Islam by being in Islamic surroundings. So not just studying in Leiden, because that was the tradition. All the students of Islam or the Arabic world, they never left their study. So they were sitting in their study, reading old texts and or more contemporary texts, but they were scholars sitting in their studies. And Snouck Hurgronje really wanted to be among people, Islamic people in an Islamic society. And an opportunity emerged when the Consul General of the Netherlands in Jeddah actually wanted to have somebody to study pilgrims from Indonesia, what they experienced in the Holy Land. By the way, the Dutch government didn't think this was a good idea, so Snouck was never supported by the Dutch government to go to Jeddah. There were private money actually which made it possible that Snouck went to Jeddah, and in the end also to Mecca. That was in 1884, 85. First he went to Jeddah and interviewed and made pictures of all kinds of pilgrims visiting the Dutch consulate. But of course people said, why don't you go to Mecca yourself? Why? Because that's where the center of the Islamic world is, and you will learn much more than just being in Jeddah and talking to people. So he went to Mecca and stayed there for nine months. And he was a pioneer as a scholar, because he started this anthropological study of Islamic society. So not just from manuscripts, but study Islam, how it functions in his case in Mecca. And well, you know, he wrote a famous book on his experiences in German, so that everybody could read it in the Western world. And he was indeed a pioneer in that sense. So the first scholar, not just taking his information from text, but also from real life. And he thought, after his experience in Mecca, I really want to continue this work, and I want to be in an Islamic environment. And this was the reason why he wanted to become an advisor to the Dutch government in Indonesia. And it worked. And so in 1889, he went to Java and to become an advisor of the government. And one of his first assignments actually was to study the revolt in Banten, which happened just 1 year before his arrival in Batavia, Jakarta, in 1888. And he studied the Banten revolt, and he just found out that this was pretty much a result of very bad colonial rule. And he also found out that one of the reasons people revolted was that the Dutch civil servants did not respect the local customs and did not respect Islam. So I'm already a little bit further in my presentation. Yes, that's where we are now. So please go ahead with the. So this is Professor Kunen, as you can. So one of his professors. So next slide, please. This on the right is Professor De Goeje, so he's Professor of Arabic. Next slide. So this is the Dutch Consul General. This is pictures from Mecca, from his book Mecca. Next slide, please. Other pictures from his book Mecca. Next slide, please. So he went to Java. That's where we are at the moment. So he studied the Banda revolt. He got his. So next slide, please. The next slide, please. This is the Banten revolt. So these are the people who were arrested by the police and the army after the revolt. So I already explained that Snouck Hurgronje was very critical about Dutch colonial rule in Banten because he thought this is the cause of this revolt, and because the Dutch colonial civil service did not respect the local customs and also not Islam. Next slide, please. So he went. He got two very important assistants for his study of the local society. Hassan Mustafa, Haji Hassan Mustafa, you see on the right, a chief Pengulu at the end of Bandung, a very important Sudanese Islamic scholar and a poet. He became assistant of Snouck Hurgronje, and on the left you have Said Othman, an Arab Islamic scholar, and both helped Snouck with his study on Islam. Next, please. So he traveled across Java, studied the Islam and also the everyday life of the people on Java. And what he actually result of his study was that he wanted to inform the Dutch colonial government on Islam and how to administer Islam better on Java. So he wanted to make sure that the Dutch colonial government respected Islam on Java. Next slide, please. He also married. He married Sankana, who is the daughter of the chief Pengulu of Chamis, and he got 4 children with Sankana. So chief Pengulu of Chamis, so you understand, this is the elite families of Chamis. He got involved with that and married and very much loved, actually, Sankana. They lived together in Banten. Next, please. So now we go to where you are, Aceh. You know, of course, everything about the conflict between the Netherlands and Aceh. Just to remind you that when Snouck Hurgronje entered, we came to the Dutch East Indies. This conflict already had a history of almost 20 years, and the Dutch army was retreated to a small let's say, fortress around Banda Aceh. So next, please. You see a picture here of this fortress. So you see a checkpoint of the Dutch colonial army at Aceh, checking people who went in from the environment of Banda Aceh. Next, please. So Snouck Hurgronje was asked by the Dutch colonial government to go to Aceh. He went there in 1891-92, and he stayed in Banda Aceh for a couple of months. He learned the language. I mean, one of the special things about Snouck that he was he had an enormous capacity of learning languages. So he learned first Acehnese to be able to discuss the situation with local informants. And also he wrote a dictionary for himself and to be able to do so. So he was, and he discussed the situation with a lot of people in Banda Aceh, and he as a result he published a kind of copy of the Mecca books. So he also had this Achenese books in which he analyzed Achenese society, but also came up with the advice, first of all, not to count on the Sultan of Aceh, because he thought the Sultan of Aceh was not of any importance. Secondly, the Dutch should fight the ulama and all kinds of adventurers in the and eliminate them in Aceh. And third, this should be followed by a good colonial rule. Good colonial rule with local chiefs, but then because of this good colonial rule, the people of Aceh would accept, he thought, Dutch colonial rule. Next, please. This takes actually, this book is from 1891-92, but it takes a lot of years until the Dutch government actually accepted Snouck Hurgronje's advices. It's only after Teuku Umar switches sides from the Dutch to the Achenese that the Dutch government in the end accepted the advices of Snouck Hurgronje. And then Snouck Hurgronje together with Van Heuts, you can see Van Heuts here on the picture, and Snouck is on the left of the picture. Both they start a campaign in Aceh. It's the Snouck Hurgronje who is the author of the military strategy, and it's Van Heuts who is actually executing what is the strategy of Snouck Hurgronje. Next, please. This results, of course, as you all know, in a terrible war. You see a picture here of the colonial army after they conquered a village in Aceh. It's a very gruesome picture in which you also see that the colonial army is not a European army. There are Europeans there in the picture, but there are also a lot of people from Indonesia in this colonial army, from the Moluccas or elsewhere in the archipelago. Next, please. To one of his darkest days of Snouck Hurgronje during his life in Indonesia was the death of his wife, the death of Sankana. She dies when she was in labor of their fifth child, and his 4 children. You can see on the right picture, his four children were taken care of by the Bupati of Ciamis, and especially of the Raden Ayu, Lasmita Kusuma, you see on the left picture. So Snouck Hurgronje left his children in the care of the Bupati of Ciamis. Next, please. But he found a new love, a new wife, Siti Sadia, or Bua. He married again in Bandung, but lived with her in Batavia, Jakarta, and got 1 child, Yusuf. You see them on the picture there. Next, please. In 1906, Snouck left Indonesia. The Governor General at that moment was Van Heuts. They quarreled. They disagreed on a lot of issues, and Snouck Hurgronje then angrily left for the Netherlands. He left his family behind. You see the family on the right side. So his 5 Indonesian children, his wife, and Lasmita Kusuma is there again on the picture. And in the Netherlands, he married with another woman and got a daughter. You see them on the right side. So actually, he was married at that time with 2 women, one in Indonesia, one in the Netherlands. He had 5 children in Indonesia and 1 child in the Netherlands. So it was really a double life he had. Next, please. So back in the Netherlands, he becomes very critical about Dutch colonial rule. Actually, he becomes also critical about his own ideas on Aceh, because he realizes that his strategy did not work, that the good colonial government did not emerge, that the people of Aceh still didn't accept Dutch colonial rule, and he actually became very critical about that in Leiden when he followed the news from Indonesia, the Dutch East Indies. He also becomes very critical about colonial rule after the First World War. So the First World War is a very bloody affair in Europe, and he lost faith in let's say Western civilization during that period. Next, please. Snouck, as a professor, worked from this house, still called the Snouck Hurgronje house in Leiden at the Rapenburg. Next, please. And he kept in contact with his Indonesian family. You see his son Yusuf here. He is marrying Madeleine Wiranata Kusuma, so the daughter of the Bupati of Bandung. You see the Bupati Wiranata Kusuma on the left side of the picture. So they were still, also his children were in the elite of Bandung, and so they married. And Snouck kept contact with his family and also supported them if necessary financially. Next, please. He also stayed influential by his students, who also became members of or staff members of this Bureau of Indigenous Affairs, who actually reported on the nationalist movement, on developments in the Indonesian society. And if you look very carefully, you can see a small picture of Snouck on the wall. And so he was inspiring still these people who are actually also very critical about Dutch colonial rule in the 20s and 30s. Next, please. Another way how he stayed influential was that he trained all the consuls in Jeddah. So the people working for the Dutch diplomatic service in Saudi Arabia actually were all trained by Snouck Hurgronje. As the person on the right side of the picture, Mr. van der Plas, who actually also played a role in the Indonesian Revolution, or against the Indonesian Revolution after the Second World War. But that's not a story. Next, please. And through the information of his students, he actually was very much impressed by Ibn Saud, so the king of Saudi Arabia. It was through Snouck Hurgronje that the Dutch government actually recognized Saudi Arabia as one of the first countries in the world. And here you see Snouck with the Crown Prince visiting Leiden University. So he was an admirer of Saudi Arabia. Next, please. At the end of his life, he was also very somber about the future of the Dutch East Indies. He thought that the Dutch government actually had a very bad policy, not respecting the Indonesians, not recognizing the importance of the nationalist movement. He was very somber. Actually, he said if nothing changes, the Dutch East Indies will end, so will fall or will end in a bloody conflict, in a war. So he really urged the Dutch government to change his policies of oppressing the nationalist movement, and he wanted to have a democratic Indonesia, but the Dutch government, of course, was not very willing to follow his advices. And in a way, he died as a somber and perhaps a little bit as a bitter person. Next, please. And in 1936, he died and was buried in Leiden. So this is his grave. Nobody was present. He didn't want to have anyone present at his burial. So his wife and daughter were left at home when his body was collected and brought to his grave. So as a somber, as a disappointed man, Snouck Hurgronje ended his life. So thank you very much for this very brief overview of the life and times of Snouck Hurgronje. Thank you very much.